And now we will start Copri's event of Korea Arctic Science Research Seminar under the topic Next Generation IBRV Solving Future Arctic Issues. Good day. I am from Copri. My name is Choi Young-jun. Despite your very busy schedules, I would like to thank distinguished guests, presenters, discussants here today, and all participants joining us online and offline. In compliance with the government and Busan City's social distancing measures, we have minimized the number of offline participants, and the seminar is live streamed online. This is the second Korea Arctic Science Research Seminar. We will be looking at the Polar Activities Promotion Act enactment, the 2050 Arctic Activities Strategy, and the Next Generation IBRV, and the top 7 issues that needs to be addressed with the new IBRV. And by using the IBRV, we will be tackling Arctic issues not only by researchers, but on some of the possible research topics, we have invited experts to give presentations, and we have simultaneous interpretation being provided. If you need interpretation, please use the receiver in front of you. Those of you joining us online, you can access the 2021 APW website to choose the language of your preference. And now we will start the second Korea Arctic Science Research Seminar. We would like to open this seminar by introducing honored guests. From the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, we have Director Lee Chul-jo. Thank you very much. And now we will start the main session with an opening address by President Kang Sung-ho of Copri. Good day. I am Kang Sung-ho, President of Copri. Distinguished guests, despite your busy year-end schedules, I would like to thank you for being here, and Director Lee Chul-jo of Marine Policy at the MOF has graced us with his presence, and I thank you. We are hosting the second Korea Arctic Science Research Seminar today, and to all experts from the industrial, academic, and research arenas taking time out of their busy schedules for presentations and discussions, I thank you on behalf of Copri. The year 2021 will be known as a groundbreaking leaping board for Korea's Arctic research. In April, the Polar Activities Promotion Act, long awaited by all members of the polar community, was enacted and entered into effect in October. In June, to broaden Korea's Arctic science research in terms of region and sector, the Next Generation Icebreaking Research Vessel Building Project passed the preliminary feasibility study. In November, the MOF announced Korea's strategic direction for Arctic activities in the 2050 Arctic Activities Strategy. Korea thereby laid a new foundation for a new leap forward in scientific research in the Arctic, securing legislative and policy framework as well as infrastructure. However, global warming is rapidly changing the Arctic environment, which results in accelerated climate change originating from the Arctic. We cannot rest on our laurels under these circumstances. Now that we have established groundwork for a new leap forward, we need to contribute to resolving Arctic challenges by designing the right Arctic scientific research for this purpose. The Next Generation IBRV building project presented 7 Arctic issues to be addressed by the vessel and derived corresponding future research demand in Korea. Supported by the strong commitment from the MOF, the vessel building project was able to set sail. The second Korea Arctic Science Research Seminar As such, we'll examine response to climate change, marine ecosystem, marine resources, and exploration technologies, which are presented as key Arctic issues to be addressed by the next generation IBRV, and present future research direction and hold expert discussions. As the next generation IBRV was long awaited, not only by Copri but also Arctic researchers in Korea, this seminar invited not only Copri researchers but experts from the industrial, academic, and research arenas in Korea as presenters and panelists. I hope today's seminar presents how the new icebreaker to be built with 277.4 billion Korean won can be utilized to address Arctic challenges by suggesting the direction for Arctic science research and generates expected outcomes as a key platform for discussion. I would like to once again thank Director Lee Chul-jo for attending the seminar and all presenters and panelists. Thank you very much.
예, 개회사를 해주신
Thank you very much, President Kang, for your opening address. Next, I would like to invite Lee Chul-so, Director of Marine Policy Bureau at Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, for his congratulatory remarks. 소리가
네, 안녕하십니까. 해양수산부.
Good day. I am Lee Chul-jo, Director of Marine Policy Bureau at the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude on behalf of the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries to President Kang Song-ho of Korea Polar Research Institute and all those involved in enabling the second Korea Arctic Science Research Seminar to take place today despite the difficulties caused by COVID-19. And I would also like to extend my gratitude to all of our speakers and panelists who will be sharing their insights. Today, it was a year of great significance in the polar history of Korea. It was already mentioned by President Kang. So if I may just briefly mention, finally, the Polar Activities Promotion Act was established in April of this year. And now, the Next Generation Icebreaking Research Vessel Construction Project passed the feasibility study that will help us enable research activities in high latitudes. Based on this achievements and our past performance, I believe that it is critical for us to set forth the direction for scientific research as well as policy, and that is why we've established the 2050 Arctic Activities Strategy. And the key point in this strategy is to resolve the pending issues such as marine pollution of the Arctic Circle, and also based on clear steadfast trust with the indigenous people, we want to engage in some further research as well as activities. And I believe that this is a true strategic way forward that is comparable to the prominence of Korea in the international stage. Today we will be talking about the way forward in our activities in the Arctic, and I believe that it carries significant meaning. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, with the next generation research icebreaker vessel, we believe that the quality and the quantity of our research in both the Arctic and Antarctic will be gaining significance. Arctic studies will be extended to 156 days. And the Antarctic research will be extended from 61 to 122 days. And particularly, there were areas that were not accessible with Araon. But now, the Barents Sea and the CAO will enable us to look into various research opportunities of the atmosphere, the climate, as well as the cryosphere. So this will be serving as a transformation point for Korea's Arctic studies. There are extreme abnormalities that are emerging due to the changes in the Arctic, and this is no longer something in the future. It's something that impacts us today. So we need to make sure to protect the lives of the citizens and engage in further research activity. And I do know that the next generation IBRV will enable all that, and I hope that we can engage in some further discussions on how to utilize this opportunity. Once again, thank you very much to all of those involved at Copri for making today possible, and I would like to extend my gratitude to the researchers and experts for their insights. Thank you.
예,
Thank you, Director Lee, for giving us a congratulatory remarks despite your busy schedules. And now we are ready for the keynote presentation on a voyage of new horizons on board the Korea's next generation IBRV. We would like to invite Director Seo Won-sang of the Department of Strategic Planning of Copri.
네, 안녕하십니까.
Hello, I am Seo Won-sang, Director of the Department of Strategic Planning at Copri. I was in charge of the planning part of this new project, and I have come to present this topic, and the fact in itself is a great honor for me. I was on this project for 3 years, but I persuaded the government to pass this project through the preliminary feasibility studies, which took 7 years total. The first reason that we were able to pass this project is the MOF clearly demonstrated its ability and commitment to pass through this project, and therefore polar research related experts and institutions across the country shared the need to develop this project and demonstrated the need for this project very clearly, and I would like to thank you for your support. The topic is the voyage of new horizons on board Korea's next generation research icebreaker. Quite progressive, and I think that regarding this IBRV, this is the very first time that we are disclosing this official project to the public. So I would like to share what kind of process we took for the project to be passed and what we dream of for the future. And I would like to share this presentation with Vice President of Copri, Shin Hyung-chul. Next slide. Can I control the slides? Okay. So this is the table of contents, and let me go through my slides one by one. So in 2013, as you know, we became the observer to the Arctic Council. And with that, there had been a surge in interest towards the Arctic, and in particular through climate change, as sea ice in the Arctic drastically was reduced. Some said that this was a crisis of climate change, or others said that they focused on what the impact would be on Korea, and while others focused on the possible increase in economic value, fisheries, natural resources that will be now accessible with the less ice extent and also the opening up of the Arctic sea routes. But what is common is that whatever the opportunities or challenges presented, we have to go to the Arctic ourselves and examine, research, and analyze the Arctic. There was no argument on this point. So we must go to the Arctic, but we already had an ice-breaking research vessel to do this with, and that was the Araon. But the problem with Araon was that Araon was the sole ice-breaking research that had to be injected into both Antarctica and Arctic, going through both poles, which is a very long way. And if you look at the chart, the travel voyage was only about 85 days, but the research expedition day was about 85 days, but the travel days was 150 days. So this was very inefficient, but inevitable. Since 2013, if you can see the map on the right, I think that January 2018 is the first of the map. The green indicates, the line indicates the ice thickness of 1 meters, blue 1.5 meters, and 2 by 2 meters of ice that can be broken by the vessels. And the white line is the BEEZ of coastal states. So inside the white line is the area open up for all countries, including Korea, to freely conduct research, and that is the CAO. So you see the changes in the map, but depending on the thickness of ice, there is great changes and difference. Because Araon in the Arctic Ocean can only operate for 2 months in the summer, where there is hardly any ice in the Arctic. So towards the top of the map, Chukchi, East Siberian Sea area, the Pacific side of the Arctic was the only area covered by Araon. So we wanted to cover the entire Arctic and the CAO over a long period of time with a new IBRV. And the topic of this project was to build the next generation IBRV that can operate in a green manner in the CAO. We have 4 boxes on the top that indicate the usage of this vessel. First is to respond to climate change and extreme weather on the Korean Peninsula. Second, to conserve and secure new CAO fisheries resources as an opportunity. And in using the IBRV, we are going to share the vessel with nationwide to revitalize polar research. And finally, we wanted to conduct international joint research to boost competitiveness of Korea's Arctic research. And also, in terms of Arctic governance, we wanted to boost Korea's influence. That was the major goal behind the project. And the IBRV is, compared to Araon, we'll have a new moon pool that was not on Araon. So that is on the bottom right. Crown Prince Hakon, at the bottom of the ship, has a hole. So through this moon pool, any drilling devices or exploration devices can be lowered and pulled up very safely. So Araon, the case of Araon, does not have moon pool, so we have to take the device out of the ship off the board of the deck, which is quite dangerous. And another new idea is that there will be detachable modular equipment in both Antarctic and the Arctic. We will have to cover more areas and more research. And there will be a number of different research demands to be fulfilled by this new IBRV. By modularizing equipments that are made detachable from the vessel, that would be very easy for us to support different demands. And comparing Araon with the new IBRV, we have a stronger ice-breaking capability and durability against cold conditions. Detachable and modular equipment will be added. These are the main improvements. And the GT is almost twice that of Araon, about 15,000 tons. It can sail 75 days without supply. Out of that, 25 days will be using LNG, and the 50 days low sulfur fuel, so it will have a dual fuel system. Can you see the picture at the bottom? If you take a closer look, Araon on the left has a crane in front of the ship where the container boxes will be loaded. But if you look at the new IBRV, the cabins are moved up front, and at the back there will be modularized container boxes loaded here. With all the equipment will be loaded here. So research equipment will all be loaded in one place for better efficiency. Then 5 years from now, the new IBRV, compared to other IBRVs overseas, how does it play? Well, in 2019, China, and in 2020, UK, 2021, Australia built a new ice-breaking research vessel. And Germany and Japan are building new ones too. In terms of ice-breaking capability, Korea's new IBRV does not fall short. But here's one question for you. There is a new vessel that we know, but is not included here. That's the 2018 Norwegian Crown Prince Stockholm. But its ice breaking capability is about 1 meter with 10,900 GT. But compared to Arctic coastal states, why do the mid-latitude countries build a larger and better capability vessels? We did have some questions about this and challenges during the preliminary feasibility studies. But for Arctic states, their EEZs are in the Arctic Ocean, and they can look at the sea ice conditions and very flexibly adjust their research schedule. But countries in the mid-latitude countries, once we go to the Arctic, we cannot come back and to adjust our schedules. We have to push through with our schedules anyhow. But the sea ice conditions continue to change constantly. So under these circumstances, we inevitably need a larger and better ship with a better ice breaking capacity. And what would change with the new IBRV? If you look at the top row, this indicates the Araon trajectory from July 2030 to November 2030. That the ones indicated in the red are areas where Araon can cover, and in the bottom row in purple you see from the same period, in the same time period, the areas that the new IBRV can cover. With Araon, as you can see, during the summer area, we can conduct certain research. However, we needed a next generation IBRV because of the desperate need from scientists in Korea, because Araon can only cover the Arctic CAO in the summer when there is no ice. But the scientists wanted to see the process of melting and thickening ice, and the changes of sea ice and how that impacts the circulation of the air and the ocean, and also some of the microorganisms that are frozen in the water and then released when the water melts, ice melts, what kind of impact that has on the air, and how the sea ice changes in the Arctic impacts the Korean Peninsula. So to examine all this, scientists needed to go to the Arctic Ocean, not after the ice has already melted, but follow the ice as it changes to see the field for themselves. And Araon could not support this demand, and therefore we needed a IBRV, a new IBRV. And once we have the vessel built, not only the ice-breaking capabilities, but throughout the year for multi-seasonal research, we can conduct different researches. Right now, Arctic research days will be expanding from 35 to 156 days, and for Antarctic, 50 to 101 days, 121 days. And the sea area covered will be much enlarged. Then, once we have the new vessel built, what will be the tasks to be tackled? As for details, I think that you will be hearing from our presenters and discussants. But while planning out the project, I think we can summarize the big tasks into opportunities and risks. Until 2050, we will be able to build a proprietary predictive model on Arctic sea melting and be able to predict the weather changes on the Korean Peninsula and elevate the level to the level of advanced nations. And that is the key 2050 goal. And we collected and sorted out all the demand and targets accordingly. This is a very exciting photo. Yesterday at a different seminar, you saw a similar picture. This is from the Mosaic project. Polar Stern is lighted up against the polar night to support the researchers' work. Korea wanted to be a part of Mosaic and were invited, but because of the Araon schedule, And with Araon's icebreaker capabilities, we could not take a central part. It was too risky for Korea. And so only the remote exploration team was a part of the Mosaic project. And it was very unfortunate that we were not able to be a part of Mosaic and IODP on the field in the Arctic. But that dream of taking leadership and initiative in large international projects, we were able to build IBRV. And from the very planning stage, we prepared the project as an open platform. Internally, we have the Joint Usage Committee that pulls together the government, academia, and industry. And externally, Mosaic or SAS or other large-scale international joint projects could be led by IBRV and with Korea at the center, and that is the main vision and goal and dream. And in terms of observation systems, there is a number of different systems that can be integrated. In Korea, not only vessels, but there are various types of observation infrastructures, on land and offshore. And there are fixed on-land observation facilities that is very stable, but it only covers a narrow scope and cannot conjunct the data with ocean data. And we conduct remote exploration that can cover a number of different areas. But when there is cloud that blocks the view, there can be blind spots, and the observation can be hindered. And there is no one facility dedicated to the Arctic. But once IBRV goes into the CAO and conducts field studies, it can combine both data onshore and from the satellite and verify and validate the data. Then we will be able to have a comprehensive observation system to acquire accurate data, which will contribute greatly to the development of Arctic research. Last but not least, these are some of the things that we need to think of. So it is basically a summary of what I have been saying. The IBRV is not just for the Arctic research, but the development of all polar research in Korea. And just because we have a new vessel, Araon will not be forgotten. Each will have its own mission and role to conduct best research. And what we must be resolute on is that not only for researchers conducting Arctic research, but all the Korean people who will be benefiting from research altogether own IBRV, and we must cherish IBRV. And last but not least, to international experts who gave us much support, I wanted to greet these six persons. I think it was December 1980s, 90s. We had an international conference, and we had those persons from all these different nations coming in Korea to share their ideas about the IBRV project. From Norway, we had Dr. Kim Holman, who said that Norway had built up the vessel in 2018, but like 9 p.m. December 31st, 1998 was when all these projects really first started. So he cheered us on to pull through with the project. And compared to Norway, I think that Korea really pushed ahead very quickly. Concluding my presentation, once again, I would like to thank you all for your great support. Thank you.
네, 오늘 주제
Yes, that was a fuller, you gave us a fuller picture of the beginning, expectations, conclusion of the new project for our future discussions. This seminar is very significant because number one, from MOF, we are joined by the MOF, and not only Copri experts, but IBRV joint utilization and openness has been reflected through other experts from different sectors. So to commemorate this moment, we would like to proceed with a group photo. I would like to ask Director Saw and Director Lee at the front row, and the presenters at the second, discussants at the second row, and presenters next to our honored guests. Please come forward for the photo op.
있습니다. 고, 네. 다 같이 찍기 위해서 패널에 계신
I would like to kindly ask our panelists as well to join us on stage for the photo op.
예, 감사합니다. 그러면
Thank you very much. And while we prepare the stage, we will take a short break. And at about 10:05, we will start with the presentation and discussions.
네. 예, 그럼 지금부터 본격적으로
Let us now move on to the presentations. We will be looking into the next generation IBRV, solving future Arctic issues, and we will be talking about what kind of projects may be possible going forward. So we will be seeking some suggestions from our speakers, and I would like to kindly ask our speakers to come up on to the stage for their presentations. So first, we would like to invite our next speaker who will be talking about what we can get from the Arctic, the weather and the climate forecasting perspective. We will have Professor Lee Myung-in from UNIS to give us a presentation. Hello everyone, I am Lee Myung-in from UNIS. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very important and meaningful session. I have 15 minutes. However, this is a very challenging topic, but I wanted to give you a preview as to what we can get from weather and climate forecasting in the Arctic. I'm sure that you are all very well aware that there is a close relationship between the mid-latitudes and the Arctic. It was also mentioned by Mr. Sa just before. So this is the Arctic amplification. You can see that for the past 40 years, it indicates the temperature highs. I think that the animation is not working right now, but as you're very well aware, in the high latitudes in the continents, there was a great increase in temperature. And if you refer to the Arctic areas, Arctic regions, it's about 2 degrees, and closer to the pole, 4 degrees. Of increase in temperature. So these are some information from the satellite. And here by latitude, you can see that in the Antarctic region, we're seeing a decrease in temperature. However, in the Arctic regions of the higher latitudes, we're seeing a great increase in temperature. This implies that there are many climate fluctuations due to the changes in the Arctic. There are 4 panels on the left, and you can see how the temperature fluctuates depending on the seasons. This is quite interesting because if you look at, you get the latitude is the y-axis, and there are some clear increases in temperature in parts of Arctic, particularly near the ground areas. So once again, the surface, the changes in the sea surface and the Arctic Ocean fluctuations are leading to these climate fluctuations. And irrespective of the seasons, you can see that we're seeing these major variations. And in addition to that, ever since the 2000s, there is this steep deviation of average temperature. You see the red and black lines. In the red line indicates the higher latitudes, including the Arctic region, and the black are the regions of the lower altitudes. But once again, you can see here that there's an exacerbation of global warming in the Arctic. So in the surface sea, I've mentioned that there are some major changes in the Arctic region, and this indicates the sea ice extent in the Arctic. Ever since the 2000s, there was a acceleration of decrease in sea ice loss, or decrease in sea ice. So these Arctic climate variations and fluctuations are leading to a great loss in sea ice, and this of course has a climatic impact on the world. If you look at the picture on the top left, this is on the trending of the temperatures in the winter season in the Arctic. I've mentioned that there is a great increase in temperature in the Arctic. However, if you look at the Siberian continent and the Korean peninsula, we are seeing a decrease in temperature. Recently, we've been seeing a weakening of this trend. However, what's for sure is that during the winter season, there are higher frequencies of cold spells that has been related to the changes of climate in the Arctic. And according to recent research, if you look at this picture on the bottom right, it indicates that the temperature changes between low sea ice and high sea ice years. So here, the mid-latitudes, including Korea, is seeing a decrease in temperature while the temperature in the Arctic is increasing. In other words, this is a warm Arctic cold Eurasian pattern, which has a direct relationship with the sea ice loss. So in terms of teleconnection, we can see that these cold temperature deviations or cold waves have a direct relationship. This is from Professor PM Kim's research. Sea ice loss, if it takes place in November and December, what happens is there will be specific waves that would be sent upwards, leading to a polar pipe anomaly that leads to increased temperatures. And then the cold currents will warm up, leading to a weakening of the polar vortex. And if that does happen, cold spells will emerge in the mid-latitudes. So there is this dynamic relationship based on his research. During the winter season, we think about the cold spells when we think about the sea ice, and many do say that it's coming from the Arctic. But there's also a lot of research on the summer season. So it's if you look at the mid-latitude heat waves in the northern hemisphere, the changes in the Arctic sea ice is impacting the temperature, especially the surface air temperature. This indicates that temperatures rise with the sea ice decline, leading to a greater number of heat wave events. So especially in the winter time, we've seen much research on teleconnection. However, in the summertime as well, we're seeing the number of heat wave events increasing, leading to great damage and losses. So we are seeing a lot of recent research that is focusing on the summertime fluctuations. It's important to understand, have a scientific understanding of the Arctic and also the impact it has on weather conditions. And of course, it will help us raise the predictability of our forecasts. The IBRV was also about understanding and minimizing the impact of natural and weather catastrophes, as mentioned by the previous presentation. That's why Arctic observations are key. And in line with that, what I would like to say is that if we look at the environment in Korea in the summer season, geologically speaking, we are in the middle of the high and mid latitudes. And not only that, we're also sandwiched between the continent and the ocean boundaries. So that's why we are impacted by these fluctuations. This was an interview with KBS, and they put together a slide for us. So if you look at the summer season in the tropical seas, the climate fluctuations are leading to heat waves as well as a long monsoon season, which is quite abnormal. Not only that, in the Indian Ocean, the convection has led to increased temperatures in the Arctic. So that's why we need to have a more refined observation of the Arctic to understand these teleconnection patterns, leading to better predictability in weather forecast. And I know that you've heard about the Arctic oscillation many times, but if I may just briefly mention, it means that regularly the air in the Arctic oscillates, leading to a fluctuation in the jet stream as well as temperatures. In Korea, depending on the changes in the pressure system, the positioning of the jet stream will change and alternate. And when we do see a strengthened AO, Arctic oscillation, during the summer season, there will be stagnant pressure systems in the upper layer of the atmosphere, leading to heat waves in the mid-latitudes of the Korean Peninsula. So based on the Arctic oscillation, there are changes to the climate conditions. If you look at the 1998 to 2000s in the Northern Hemisphere, that's what you see on the left, and what you see on the right are the changes after the year 2000s. So if we see that the Arctic oscillation is a positive, you can see that the Korean Peninsula is indicated in red. So the summer temperatures can increase with that. And if you look at the recent numbers, there are some dots which indicate that there is statistical significance between the Arctic oscillation as well as the climate variations. And we believe that the effect has amplified with the changes in the Arctic sea ice. Moving on to the heat wave events on the Korean Peninsula, there are specific indicators. Of course, I cannot go into specifics, but here it indicates how these heat wave events have emerged. So CGT is the mid-latitude waves, and PJ is the tropical waves, and the AO is Arctic oscillation. And you can see that Arctic oscillation is quite evident. And that is why we need to have a better understanding of the Arctic. The Barents-Karat Sea Arctic sea ice was observed to understand how it impacts the Eurasian region. And you can see that here we're seeing anomalies in Arctic sea ice. In other words, a great decline in sea ice. And there are blocking patterns that are emerging on the Korean Peninsula, leading to more heat wave events. So this is a literature that was published. So what we can say that it's important to predict Arctic sea decline because that impacts the weather conditions in the mid-latitudes. So then, how well are we forecasting sea ice extent? If we look at the climate forecasting, the 2-month forecast is not that accurate because there are many uncertainties in the numerical models. However, recently with the advent of technology, we have actually utilized the cryosat, a satellite that helps us observe the sea ice extent to 5 months. And the sea ice thickness is also quite important in terms of our predictability. But if you look at the correlation coefficient, it's still very low. I believe that this is due to the fact that the ice thickness is not as clear to forecast or to observe with the satellites. So Lawrence looked into how we can raise the predictability performance of our observations in the Arctic. The ECMWF, the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast, is very well known for its predictability. And you can see that there are both the green and blue lines. This indicates the site observations and also the microwave observations from the satellite. So in order to engage in better predictability in the 11 observations, we need to make sure that we have clear convection control as well as microwave observations from the satellite. And if we divide that up by season, if you compare with the winter and the summer season, in the summer season, you see that the MW is the microwave from the satellites, and the CONV is what's done on the ground or on the site. Of course, both are important. However, in the summer season, we are seeing better accuracy in the microwaves from the satellites. However, in the winter season, you can see that compared to the satellite observations, the direct site observations seem to be at the core. It's probably because of the limitations of the satellite observations. There are more uncertainties out there during the winter season. That's why we have to go on site to observe. And we also see radio sondes, aircraft, as well as buoy observations that can be included. So then, many people do say that our weather forecast has very sluggish performance, especially also if we look at the seasonal forecast, and there may be many challenges due to there are many excuses made that the numerical models lack accuracy, for instance. However, you can see that it's very important to have key input data and accurate input data. However, for the Arctic, we do not have those robust data in place for the initial input. If you look at the number of data points, observation data points in the Arctic with higher than 60 degrees latitude, we have about 1.5 million observation data that's being used. But around the world, if you look at global data, we utilize about 10 million. And you can see that compared to the global data points and the Arctic data numbers, we are lacking in Arctic. So ex post, we do say that forecasting is important, understanding the connection between the Arctic and the mid-latitudes. However, you can see that ex post research is being done. However, in the case of our ex ante or our forecasting, we need to see and have some sound data input in the initial phases in order to raise the predictability of the observation or the accuracy of the observations. If you look into the simulations of the numerical models, this is from Canada. So this was about how we can strengthen the Arctic observation data, in other words, the site observation data, for instance. And when that does happen, we were able to see that predictability, not only for the Arctic, but for the mid-latitudes, tend to get better. So you can see that for the winter and the summer seasons, you can see that there is better predictability by raising the accuracy of Arctic observation data. We're also engaging in seasonality forecasting, for instance, whether it will be cold, warm in the summer season, how many heat waves we will be witnessing, and we want to forecast at least a couple of months beforehand. So resetting the data is very important, and what we are focusing on recently is the following. It's true that there wasn't a lot of research on this topic because the initial data points for the oceans and sea ice is critical, and we've actually utilized 3 points to do that. If you look at this graph A on the top, you can see that this is when we do not reset the data on ocean and sea ice. So this is the predictability performance without the reset. So for the continents, the areas that are red means that we have raised or better predictability. So there are some limitations that you can see here in this color coding map. So this is the limitations of the existing technology. However, if you look at the graph B, this is when we actually utilize satellite data as input initially. And you can see that if we do have a balanced initial data input, predictability in the mid and high latitudes improved. So compared to this graph A, if we go to graph C, for instance, the initial data input of the ocean and sea ice will have a great impact on predicting the weather conditions by the seasons. So let me now move on to the possible future with the IBRV. Dr. Kim Jo-ung's research paper was used for this part of the presentation. So in the winter season of more than 70 degrees latitude in the Arctic seasons, or Arctic regions, if we engage in the observations, we will be able to predict any cold spells, flying dust, or yellow dust phenomenon on the mid-latitude. So it indicates that by utilizing the IBRV, bettering the accuracy of the observations in the Arctic will help us also improve our forecast in the mid-latitudes. This was the ECMWF's AO 2018 campaign. So here, the autumn, as it gets closer to the Arctic, was able to improve its accuracy in its observations. Recently, there is heightened awareness on the fact that these atmospheric fluctuations have a correlation with the Arctic. You can see that the ice sea concentration is greatly deviating, and in the Chuk Sea, you can see that all of these variations and fluctuations are impacting the mid-latitudes. This slide was also an animation, but unfortunately we cannot see it. But what I want to say is the Arctic region will change immensely. We do predict that there will be even more fluctuations. But there was just one slide before this, which indicated the PM 2.5. So when we do observe these fine dust, we are seeing high concentrations in the Arctic region, meaning that due to the global warming in the high latitudes, it will lead to heat waves as well as forest fires in the mid-latitudes, leading to more fine dust, and of course, in turn, resulting in further Arctic sea ice decline. So along with the climatic impacts from the Arctic sea ice decline, it will also lead to some future climatic changes in the conditions of the mid-latitudes going into this vicious cycle. So including the IBRV and other observation capabilities, it's important to better our scientific understanding and enhance our predictability. And once we do that, I believe that we can find a way to prepare for any catastrophes. Thank you very much.
네, 북극발 기후 변화.
So that was on the climate change, results from the changes in climate in the Arctic. Moving on.
The next presentation is on the impact of environmental pollution on marine ecosystems in the Arctic Ocean and future research ideas. We have Professor Seung-kyu Kim from International University. Hello, I am Kim Seung-kyu from International University, Oceanography Department. I would like to present the impact of environmental pollution on marine ecosystems in the Arctic Ocean and future research areas. This is the order of my presentation. Arctic Ocean is the dead end of environmental pollutants. I will show you an overview of how environmental pollutants move to the Arctic Ocean, the rapid transition of Arctic Ocean environment, the future impact, and the research we must conduct accordingly, and the future tasks and prospects. As you are well aware, the surface current ends at the Arctic, and so through these currents, pollutants could enter into the Arctic. But the flow is from the Pacific and the Arctic, but from the those that come through the Atlantic, they immediately travel outside of the Arctic. But in the case of the currents from the Pacific, it is trapped inside the Arctic. So the pollutants from the Pacific impacts the entire Arctic circumpolar region. Second point, the pollutants come through to the Arctic through the air. Depending on the chemical properties, such as high volatile pollutants, can come through the air to the Arctic, but these with low volatility have a grasshopping effect that repeatedly are distilled, evaporated, and then deposited. So these very complex water and air currents are combined to bring pollutants to the Arctic, so the source of the pollutants are very difficult to trace. Anyhow, there are so many different environmental pollutants regulated across the globe, but they arrive at the Arctic and are accumulated according to a number of different studies. For instance, if you look at the blood lead level of those living in the Arctic, the share, more than 50% of the population have a higher than average level. So this indicates that these pollutants are indeed being accumulated in the Arctic. And as the earlier presenter said, through the air, these pollutants flow into the Arctic region. There are volatile organic pollutants that travel through to the western end of the Arctic, and you can see that compared to the mid-latitude level, the level of contamination can be even higher than in the Arctic. So such accumulation through the food webs in the Arctic could be bioaccumulated and spread. I said earlier that the pollutants reach the Arctic through the ocean or the air. And let me share with you why this is important using PFAA. From 20 years ago, PFAAs and PFCAs have been classified as risk materials, and it consists of FTOH and the PFCA, highly soluble. The precursors are highly volatile, and as you can see in the graph, mainly they are highly concentrated in advanced nations and cities. But the problem is that these precursors in low nitrogen air can convert the photo degradation to PFCA. And if you look at the concentration of PFCA concentration is high in the Arctic and low contaminated areas. So this means that through the air, environmental pollutants can be accumulated to a high level in the Arctic, and on the other hand, mid-latitude mid-altitude levels, if we ban the release of these materials in the mid-altitude level, then we can see an immediate decline in the concentration of these materials in the Arctic. So when we conduct a test of level tested the level of blood in Arctic seals, once these pollutants were regulated in the mid-altitude area, we can see an immediate drop in the blood level of Arctic seals. And so, compared to the volume produced, in terms of volumes produced, PFCA volume is much higher than precursors. So it is too early to say that peak has been reached. So in going forward, about 30 to 50 years, we will have to see that the concentration level may rise, continue to rise for the time being in the Arctic, because there's a time delay between the precursor and the PFCA. And as the earlier speaker said, the Arctic Circle is undergoing a massive change. It takes about 3.4% of total, 4.3% of total ocean area and 1.4% of total ocean volume. There are 8 Arctic Council member states, and there are a number of different observers participating. As you heard earlier, the sea ice is declining drastically in the Arctic, and there is great change. In particular, in the eastern Siberia, the West Arctic Sea, the change is even more dramatic. Because of climate change and global warming, anthropogenic activities will grow in the Arctic, and therefore human activities will spread into the Arctic. This slide indicates that by 2032, almost all the regions in the Arctic will be developed or used in one way or another. And this means that pollutants flowing into the Arctic will be multi-layered, concentrated, and diversified in the Arctic with different sources. Another change is that there are about 6 big rivers in the Arctic region, and pollutants, the fresh water that is discharged takes up 10% of total freshwater discharged globally. So I said that the ocean volume of Arctic Ocean is only 1.4% of total, but 10% of freshwater flows into the Arctic Ocean, meaning that because of global warming and climate change, more and more freshwater is discharged into the Arctic Ocean, and this can incur changes in the Arctic Ocean and more pollutants flowing into the Arctic. Another point is that the declining sea ice extent will lead to the development of NSR, and this will boost ship traffic. According to recent studies, the number of vessels going through the Arctic has been growing at 20% level each year, and this will continue to grow, meaning that pollutants from vessels could reach the Arctic in a massive manner, and beyond the existing regulations on ships, any ships that use the NSR or the Arctic sea routes, additional agreements or regulations will be raised. In the Arctic region, the declining sea ice extent would impact the ocean, the air, and the interaction between ocean and air, leading to higher volume of sea ice and changes in the flux. So the pollutants will be traveling to the ocean, the Arctic Ocean, in different channels and in different volumes. So this slide shows you a snapshot of that change. From the onshore, because of increased human activities, there will be diversified sources of pollutants that can further travel into the Arctic through the ocean or through the air. Increased precipitation means that any pollutants that enter the air could lead to a higher flux and accumulation in the Arctic, and in the ocean through the ocean currents, a long distance travel of the pollutants will also grow, and through the flux, more pollutants will be accumulated. And as multi-year ice changes to one-year ice, primary production will grow along with the biological pump. So overall, in the Arctic region, pollutant dynamics will change fundamentally. So not only the dynamics, but the ecosystem will change as well. As with the reducing sea ice, of course, the subpolar biodiversity will change. Habitats, range, effective abundance, prey accessibility, seasonality, physiology of all these species will change. This is POP, mid to long-term monitoring results. Yes, POP has been on a downward trend ever since the regulations, but some of the PCB, for example, has been actually growing after a decline. We were not sure whether this is because of a climate change or because of the ocean current increase inflow of ocean currents into the Arctic Ocean. We need further studies. And if you look at the polar bear, which is an interesting topic, decline in sea ice means less prey and less body conditions. However, there is a higher concentration of POP in the lipophilic POPs in the bodies of the polar bears, and this may lead to more abundance of polar bears. I mentioned earlier that there is multi-year ice and one-year ice, which affects primary production, which in turn affects the food chain as a whole. Multi-year ice being changed and replaced with first-year ice will give impact on the food web and food chain, and any contaminants that flow into the Arctic may have different impact. So as a future research area, I would like to raise the issue of microplastics, because all the pollutants I've been mentioning are at the molecular level, but plastics are at a particle level. Plastics are made by refining petroleum, and as of 2014, 6% of petroleum production, and in 2015, 20% led to the production of plastics. However, in producing and burning plastics, a massive amount of GHG is emitted. By 2050, 1.5 degrees Celsius is the temperature rise limit that we are going for. And in order to achieve that, CO2 emission must be limited to a maximum of 570 billion tons. But about 10 to 13% of that comes from burning plastics and producing plastics. So we cannot think of climate change without plastics. And plastics also include a number of different cocktails of chemicals. So when microplastics move to the Arctic and are accumulated, then they will be a vehicle of carrying pollutants. And a large amount of plastics can directly kill marine organisms, and smaller microplastics can enter into and penetrate into the entire food web. Microplastics move to the Arctic through the ocean and the air, and can impact the entire ecosystem throughout the Arctic region. As I said earlier, our research team, along with Copri, using Araom, found that even the amount trapped inside the sea ice is 280 kilotons. And such a high amount of microplastics are already accumulated in the Arctic, mostly probably traveled through the ocean currents. Going forward, microplastics are very important for the Arctic because multi-year ice is being replaced with first-year ice with higher primary production and higher biological pump. Microplastics will be intervening into this process, combining with organics, either enhancing or hindering the enhancement. So this will impact the overall carbon circulation. And this confusion caused by microplastics need to be looked into by Araon and also IBRV. And in these areas, these will be the top priority areas for our future research. And also with the decline in sea ice, this will lead to some of the barriers that block the movement of floating materials. So near the ice breaker vessels, we will have multiple and mounting layers of contaminants in the Arctic Ocean, which requires further research. And microplastics include not only molecular pollutants, but they will change the entire ecosystem. It has been used for the past 70 years and continue to flow into our ocean. And most of the microplastics in the Arctic Ocean come through the currents. And even if we stop all the production and use of plastics altogether, even right now, going forward 30 to 50 years into the Arctic Ocean, the amount that flows in will continue to grow. So that means we need to take action quickly. So to summarize, all the pollutants, toxic materials can reach the Arctic Ocean and accumulate there. Geophysical changes, increase in human activity, and changes in habitat can be occurring. Accumulation, circulation patterns can change, but we know very little. So because there will be altering the sources, pathways, and distribution and fate of pollutants, we will have to use the next generation IBRV so that Korea can take leadership in relevant research. Thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for a very broad changes in the ecosystem, marine ecosystem in the Arctic, and your future research areas.
중앙 북
Let us now move on to the next presentation on Korea's science strategy for the conservation and management of fish in the Central Arctic Ocean. We would like to invite Dr. Na Young-sur from Copri for his presentation. Hello, everyone. I am Na Young-sur, senior research fellow at Copri. I want to mention that from the very first voyage of Arahon in 2010, ever since its construction in 2009, I've been engaged in research in fish resources as well as the distribution of such fish stock. So I would like to talk about how we can conserve and manage fish resources in the Central Arctic Ocean with the perspective of a scientist. So let me talk about some of the environmental issues and changes and how it impacts fish resources in the Central Arctic Ocean, the CAO. And I would like to briefly talk about CAUFA, the Agreement to Prevent Unregulated High Seas Fisheries in the CAO, and on the importance of the role of scientific research. And the third part of my presentation will be on Korea's research capabilities in the Central Arctic Ocean. And last but not least, I would like to talk about what kind of scientific response will be desirable for the conservation and management of fish resources in the CAO. We're seeing warming of the Arctic Ocean, and I think that we can see that it's getting not just warm but hot. The surface sea temperature is increasing. We're seeing the sea ice loss, and that has led to many extreme weather anomalies around the world. So the environmental changes of the Arctic is not something that stays in the Arctic. It is becoming a global challenge. And these environmental changes in the Arctic has, of course, led to disruptions in the ecosystem and the ecology. And naturally, for the fish stock, the fish resources, it is impacted as well. With the decline in sea ice, what happens is there are specific fish stock that uses the sea ice as their habitats, but as you can see in the case of the Arctic cod, it will disrupt their habitats. With the changes in the temperature, there will be a change in their habitats. There will be a major impact on their habitats due to these changes in the environment. And if we look at the residents of the Arctic, they also say that they are witnessing many changes because there are specific fish that are caught that were never seen before. So at the end of the day, these environmental changes are impacting the activities of human beings that reside in these regions. The map you see here is currently color-coded, and the areas that are colored are the major fishing grounds of the Arctic region. It's not just the Arctic Ocean, but it also includes the subarctic ocean as well. And if you look at these fishing grounds, there are about 240 species that currently live in these waters. And the overall harvest volume is around 42% of the total catch around the world. Of course, the catch is not as significant in the Arctic Ocean right now, but with the global warming, we're seeing the subarctic oceans where the fish that live in these waters move northward, which means that the Arctic Ocean will become a new fishing ground going forward with more species making inroads. So as the Arctic Ocean is opening more opportunities for fishing, there were concerns that there may be the probability of reckless fishing. So that is why the CALFA has been signed. For scientific researchers, I think CALFA carries significant meaning. The reason why I say that is because with the signing of this agreement, fishing is prohibited at the Central Arctic Ocean, meaning that the biological resources or fish resources can be monitored, and we can also engage in scientific research to conserve, preserve, and manage these resources. If you look at the CALFA agreement, if you look at the text, it indicates the importance of scientific research. You see the preamble and Article 4 of CALFA, and it indicates that the scientific knowledge on these biological resources is something that needs to be taken advantage of. And also, it indicates that we need to promote cooperation in scientific activities aimed at increasing knowledge about the biological resources and ecosystem of the CAO. And within 2 years of the ratification, joint scientific research programs have to be put together. So with regard to CALFA, you can see that there is stress put on scientific research. So then, what kind of research capabilities does Korea possess? From 2010, we've been engaging in research on the Arctic with our Araon icebreaker. It's true that we weren't focused on the fishing resource per se. It was more on the food web and on the impact it receives from any environmental changes in the Arctic. But for more than 10 years, we've been accumulating data on the changes of the biological resources, and we've been accumulating our research know-how in the process. Going forward, we believe that it will be important to research the Korea Arctic ocean warming and its response of the ecosystem. So there's this new research project that will be launched. What we do here is utilize the existing data to understand how Arctic Ocean warming is leading to specific responses of the ecosystem. So we want to put together a system to understand the relationship between the two of warming and the response of the ecosystem, and also forecast what's in store for us in the future. So that will be the topic for this K-Aware project. There are multiple topics that we will be covering, but particularly if you look at the module on the fishing resources and the ecosystem, there are these 3 important sub-research topics. First is on the sea ice and oceans ecosystem. As you know, the Arctic Circle is interesting in that we both have the sea ice as well as the oceans together, so it's important to understand the ecosystem there on the structure and the functionalities, and also understand the spatio-temporal distribution of the biological and fish resources, in addition to technologies to acquire these resources. Not only that, simulation on the mid to long-term forecasts of these biological and fish resources will be key to understand the ecosystem of the sea ice and the oceans. So with regard to fish resources in the Arctic Ocean, you may wonder the distribution of such resources, but unfortunately we don't have data. In the Mosaic program, there were many attempts made to understand what kinds of fish species live there and also on the distribution of such species. So it's still in the initial phases of understanding the distribution of the species. But for our research, what we wanted to do was utilize various observation systems and equipment to research the species distribution. So this is something that we'll be doing in the future, but there are both pros and cons of these observation facilities, and if we can complement that, I think that we can engage in some quality research on the distribution of fish resources. To give you some more information, the traditional way would be utilizing the net, where we will be sampling the resources, but in the case of the Arahon, we're not a trawl. So what we need is an optimized mid-water trawl to complement the functions of Araon. But of course, with the next generation IBRV, I do believe that we will be seeing a better environment to carry out research. And we also have the underwater camera and the sound system, the biological sound system. And by utilizing the eDNA system, we can also acquire some more information on the species. So we want to utilize this system as well. In 2021, during the Arctic voyage of Araon, we gathered some information and also did some sampling. You can see the researchers on Araon, and on the right, you can see some of the pictures of the biological resources that were sampled in the process. If you look at the picture on the left, there you can see these long rods. So these are the so-called hand nets or landing nets. Below the sea ice, we see Arctic cods. So if you break the sea ice, you can see that the fish will come up. So what the researchers are doing are using these nets to scoop up the fish after breaking the sea ice. And on the right, you see the CAO, and the area that's indicated in red is where we've actually sampled these fish. You can see the crabs, the pollock, the cods. Well, in terms of the specific species, we're currently classifying them right now, but in CAO, you can see that there are many species living in the CAO. And another interesting fact that we've identified was that in the latitude of 76 degrees, 700 meters below water in the deep seas, we were able to film what it's like with this underwater camera. So you can see that there were specific species of the flatfish. This is the flatfish that you see here. And you can see shrimps still living in the deep waters of CAO, as well as these orcas gillies. So this is the current state, and we don't know what will happen in the future. As mentioned, we will have to wait and see whether it will become new and a more comprehensive fishing ground with the increase in temperature. What we do is we utilize our own scientific data, but we also establish a one-stop portal where anybody can have access to the scientific data and to understand the situation in the CAO. So what we want to do is, going forward, if we can acquire any fishing data, any fish resource data, we will update this portal to make sure that quality information can be accessible for all. So we want to curate this data to make sure that everybody can utilize this data. So bringing this all together, recently we are seeing a greater say from the non-Arctic states. That is why our scientific contributions will be key going forward. What we want to do is, based on our quality infrastructure, we do have our IBRV Araon, we also have our Tasan station in the Arctic. So what we want to do is utilize this infrastructure and also make use of the accumulated data and share that. And as mentioned, we have the portal and the database to make it accessible for other researchers. So when we put together our future strategy in scientific research, I think since we are at a point in time with greater participation of non-Arctic states, I think that we need to also expand the domain of our research in CAO. And with the next generation IBRV, I think that we can accelerate our efforts. And I also want to mention that it's important to engage in proactive acquisition of information. At the CAO, we still do not have information on the species distribution as well as the volume. There isn't much data, so it's important to proactively acquire information in areas or waters where data is non-existent. This will help us better our capabilities in the future. And I think that all of this data will help us model out the future prospects of fish resources and changes in the habitat. In addition to such scientific research, there's another point of consideration. The CAO is a vast is a vast waters, so we cannot do this alone. That is why we need multilateral research voyages as well as joint research projects with other countries around the world. Not only that, we have the indigenous communities living in the Arctic Circle. Their knowledge and research that befits their needs is something that we also need to conduct going forward. And utilizing this data, it's important to make inroads into the governance of various scientific organizations and mechanisms. Thank you very much.
예, 발표 잘 들었습니다.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And let us now move on to the next presentation.
넓혀서
Going even broader, we will look at the development of reverse aging exercise mimicking drugs through the study with Arctic fish. I'd like to invite Professor Mi-seop Yoon of Gachon University. Yes, as introduced, I am from Gachon University, from the Department of Medicine. I am Mi-seop Yoon. I am very honored to have this opportunity to make a presentation in this significant seminar. I would like to my topic actually is quite different from what you have been hearing today. I would like to look at how we can use Arctic resources in a more practical manner from the medical perspective and from the medicine's perspective. So my topic is the current status and outcome of the research and the future direction. And I will focus on the example of using polar bioresources based on my research and the future recommendation for research. As you know, polar research is led by Copri, and over the past 30 years, there have been much progress and achievement. In particular, a new IBRV will be built, and we are ready for a new turning point in this polar research. And I think that we need to produce more concentrated results in research, and to gain more public interest, we need to be able to produce research results that can be understood by the public. And in step with the national demand, we need to develop relevant technologies so that the research results can be more beneficial to the country. And that should be the direction of the research. And in this direction, we are conducting ecosystem and many other relevant research with Copri, and we are particularly interested in using Arctic resource. And there have already been many different relevant achievements. Just to summarize, there are two major achievements. One is to analyze the characteristics of Antarctic organisms, and using this, there are research conducted already on how to present more useful results. So for the first time in the world, a whole genome sequencing of Antarctic higher organism has been done and identified mechanism behind adaptation to extreme cold conditions. And in particular, using this technology, developing cold-tolerant gene from plants to develop cold-tolerant barley. And I understand that Antarctic lichen was used to conclude technological transfer agreement on diabetes medicine as well. So based on these research results and looking into the next generation polar research, using bioresources and biomaterials will be the key direction. And as you have been doing so far, polar biocharacteristics need to be analyzed to extract useful materials and substances, and polar biotic beta metabolome will be researched to develop practical and useful products. So these are the basic two tracks, and as you can see here, in order to commercialize these research, we need long-term research to analyze, discover the resources and analyze the characteristics and verify and validate the technologies to look at how these resources can be actually used. And commercializing them ultimately requires a long-term planning and perspective. We need to first build a pipeline of analyzing polar resources and a system to validate the research so that we can confirm the commercialization and potential. And this is a closer way to quickly reach results. However, that in turn requires discovering and analyzing biotic metabolomes and what kind of new materials linked to existing materials and how effective they can be in curing the diseases, and how we can develop them into new materials and new medicine. So this also requires a very long-term three-step planning. So I am going to show you the example of research I have done. My project was chosen as a PAP project by Copri, and for 2 years I have been working on this research to utilize polar resources. And as a model, I would like to present my project. We started off by the question out of a medical need that we face at my university. Korean society is rapidly aging, and the biggest problem here is sarcopenia of seniors. So sarcopenia would naturally seem to be a natural process of aging, but it is not the case, because sarcopenia is an illness. It is a reduction of muscle volume and the muscle power. So less mobility leads to metabolic illnesses, which drastically increases the death rate. So recently, illness code has been applied to sarcopenia, and this requires action, but we have yet to develop a cure. Doctors just simply recommend exercise and protein intake, but seniors who cannot really exercise can never overcome sarcopenia on their own. So we cannot just simply put this aside as a natural aging process. So in order to overcome sarcopenia, we need an exercise mimicking cure. So because of these characteristics, I focused on the fish from polar regions. As you have seen earlier, these fish can hardly move in the very, very cold water. They live very subsea. But even with such limited exercise and mobility, the muscles of these fish are quite sizable. And so even in such a condition with limited movement, I believe that there can be some kind of a controlling mechanism that controls the muscle. And if I can find that mechanism, I think that I can use it to help develop a cure for sarcopenia. Which also arises from lack of mobility. So in order to find a way to overcome sarcopenia of seniors, we wanted to look at the characteristics of the fish and the krill shrimps that are usually the prey for these fish. And we wanted to focus on what kind of substances in the krill fish lead to higher volume of muscles. And this is where we focused on in order to develop a cure for sarcopenia. So the target was mTOR, substance mTOR, which helps increase protein and muscles. To activate mTOR, we needed to find what would better enhance mTOR in order to overcome sarcopenia. So we looked at the substance that activates mTOR. We use different resources from Copri, KIST, and different colleges of pharmacy at University of Kacheon to find this. So we optimize our system to analyze the krills and mTOR with Copri, and at the College of Pharmacy, they found a way to optimize the way to extract the useful substance from our Antarctic krill, and we built both in vitro and in vivo system for analysis. If I show you the results, mTOR complex was identified with a fully established analysis method, and we built a analysis system by Mr. Kang Min-young at KIST. And this has not been disclosed yet, but I cannot say that we have found the mTOR complex separated from a polar fish, but we are really successful. And we found a new candidate factor that combines with mTOR. So we will be showing you 7 different factors, and we have validated them again with a mouse test and found 2 more combining factors, CSP and MIH. CSP is a protein that targets mTOR, and MYH is for muscle fiber cellular differentiation and growth. And we can show you very interestingly at the bottom, that is a picture of a muscular cell, high density photo by dyeing the cells. The yellow indicates how the 2 different proteins are combined. And if you look at the end of the right-hand side photo, at the end of the fiber, you can see that they are concentrated there, meaning that the muscle cells have been formed, and while the fibers are being formed, these 2 are combined and act in some way. So we are planning and proceeding with follow-up studies in a very interesting manner. And also, we want to look at how the muscles are enlarged among the polar fish. So with the help of Dr. Kim from Copri, we looked at the krill shrimp, because krill shrimp is the main prey for these fish, and we wanted to look at some useful substances possibly found in the Arctic krill. And we look at different factors that can impact the controlling of mTOR. And we found the 70% activated substances. So we did an analysis, and very interestingly for us, the cellular differentiation itself, so the enlarging of muscle, is not where this substance acts, but in enlarging the muscle itself, in convergence of the cells, this substance was at play. And with a secondary extraction, with a solvent, we are continuing to track down this process, and we are in phase 3, but it is not included in the slide. So we found that conversion is facilitated with no difference in cellular differentiation. So in vivo, we found how this acts in the muscles. We looked at the barium chloride to look at the muscle damage model that we already have, and how this ETOH extract works. So there are very few regenerative organs in our human body, but muscles can be regenerated after damage. So after damage, muscles are regenerated in different manners, and we can easily tell them with the naked eye. But in time, the muscles are fully restored. So we can easily analyze the impact of different substances. With Antarctic krill extract, we found that the muscle fibers are formed in a much stronger manner, and this has huge implications, because sarcopenia means the reduction of muscle volume and fiber. If at the early stage we can reinforce muscle volume, then we don't have to reach the stage of using cure. We can further delay and block sarcopenia development. So I think that there is huge potential for a cure, and we have applied for a patent, and we are continuing our research. So just briefly, we started off out of a medical need, and we use polar fish and the relevant characteristics to look at internal and external factors involved to help develop a cure of sarcopenia. We are nearly complete, and once completed, we will conduct technological transfer to develop food or medicine for sarcopenia. And furthermore, based on the polar research, we can become an entity that can develop a polar research infrastructure. So in the long-term plan, we have conducted our research for the past 2 years, but we are still at the stage of going from stage 1 to stage 2. So once we reach commercialization and develop into actual products, we need a long-term planning and support. So based on my experience, if I may, I would like to recommend a good and effective way to find useful bioresources. I think it is better to start off from a medical need. And this is a more efficient approach rather than starting from the polar region itself. And although I am not a member of Copri, please make full use of external research institutes for a fuller research. And lastly, for 2.5 years, this was a PAP project that I pursued. But the research expenses have not been sponsored yet. So a long-term planning and budgeting in place to support a longer project would be even more helpful in providing support for the long term for all Arctic or polar research that are needed. Thank you very much. Yes, with the IBRV and medical needs were connected in this very meaningful presentation.
마지막으로 북극해
Let us move on to the last presentation. The last presentation is on the development of integrated health management system for polar Oregon operating ship and offshore based on satellite data. We would like to now invite Mr. Song Kang-hyun from Korean Register in charge of eco-friendly ship plant research. Thank you very much for all of your sharing on research findings. And my presentation will be focused on the IBRV, where all of this research will take place. And with the opening of the NSR, I think that there will be more ships that will be operating in polar waters. So I would like to talk about the safety of these ships. We talked about climate, environment, fish resources, and last but not least, I also am suffering a little bit from sarcopenia, and I've been working out right now. So I believe that all of the presentations had to do with what impacts the world, and especially for the very last presentation, it actually gave me some food for thought on how I can enhance my muscular strength. So thank you very much for the presentations. In my presentation, I would like to talk about the health management system of polar operating ships and other offshore structures. So it's about how we can maintain and manage the ship integrity or the structural integrity. In the 1990s, the bulk carriers have actually been quite damaged. So the IMO decided to engage in an investigation on the causes for such damage. So what they did was install sensors on these bulk carriers to measure and monitor the stress. So this was to understand the causes of the damage, but they found out that this has helped them monitor the overall structure of the ship that led to enhanced safety of these ships. So the IMO recommended to put together a hull stress monitoring system on the ships. So for particular ships with high risks, this monitoring system is embedded, and especially for the ice-breaking vessels, such system will be paramount. The signals that are transmitted can be analyzed to understand the remaining life of the ship. And not only that, the digital twin, which is the buzzword in the shipbuilding industry right now, can also be used to manage this data and monitor this data. So I would like to talk about what kind of research is underway in these domains. I'm sure that you all know the necessity of such research because in the Arctic Circle, a lot of gas, oil exists, and if we do decide to explore these resources, you can see that Europe and to Korea, China, and Japan, high significant gas consumers will have to receive and be supplied of these resources. Then that means that we need transport routes to make that possible. And rather than going down the Suez Canal, if we do see the waters open up, we can actually economically transport these resources to our countries. And also on the shipbuilding industry, due to the environment issues, compared to last year, we've seen an increase in orders by threefold for Korean shipbuilders because this environment element is a critical factor. If the NSR opens up, we believe that there will be more IBRVs being constructed, which will become the driving force of the shipbuilding industry. The next generation IBRV has a close relationship with Korea's shipbuilding industry. In order to build sound and robust ships, you need world-class technology. And I think that Korea's shipbuilding industry has that, which will, of course, benefit the next generation IBRVs. And in the flip side, in the case of the shipbuilding industry, they can utilize their cutting-edge technology to raise their competitiveness in the ships that they build in this new Arctic era. But of course, in all this, safety is the critical element. If there is an accident, if there is any event or incident, it may lead to casualties, deaths, damage to the reputation, as well as economic loss. So for the polar operating ships, it's important to make sure that safety is guaranteed. Therefore, this research is on predicting the safest route for these ships and also find a way to engage in safe maintenance. So for these ships, what happens is maintenance takes place every 5 years. But if we do see these polar ships, they go down very difficult situations. So it's not just a prescriptive type of maintenance that is required. If they have actually went through sea ice, there will be more maintenance required. So it should be based on the environment, the context. So a risk-based maintenance technique is something that we think is necessary. So that was also the need for such techniques was one of the reasons why we decided to engage in this research. In Russia, the gas is utilizing the ARC-7 by DSME to transport the LNG to the Far East. So this is the Yamal LNG carrier. So not only with regard to transporting these resources of oil and gas in the Arctic region, if the NSR opens up, we are going to see an increase in increase in cargo volume, and versus this going through the Suez Canal, we will be able to reduce the time by 30%. And as you know, what we had to do was to utilize the Cape-size bulk carrier to go around Cape Town when the Suez Canal was blocked due to the container ship. But you can see that even compared to this route, we can reduce the time by a half if we utilize the NSR. So for the captain, if you want to voyage from A to B, it's important to first make that judgment whether this is a safe route. So that's something that should be done before the voyage. It's important to understand whether the ship has enough propulsion power to overcome the ice resistance, and you also need to understand whether it can overcome the ice impact. So in other words, structural stress is something that has to be assessed beforehand. But there are, of course, uncertainties that cannot be predicted. So sensors are embedded on the ship to engage in real-time monitoring to understand whether there are any situations where we're seeing the ship nearing towards its threshold. So then the alarm system will go up for the captain to understand what it has to do, whether it would have to divert from the situation. And by using these stress sensors, we can also measure the fatigue, the abrasion of the ship to measure the structural integrity of the ship. These sensors are very expensive, so you cannot attach these sensors to every area or every part of the ship. So it should be just focused on some key areas. And what we have to do is for areas that are not measured, data should be gathered as much as possible to manage the structural integrity of the ship by also utilizing the digital twin. So I've already mentioned some of the contents of my research, but it starts off with the satellite to observe the sea ice and to predict the ice strength. So there's a mapping of the sea ice strength that's done. Copri is in charge of mapping the sea ice strength. And once we have the map on the sea ice strength, we will decide on the safety route. And real time during the voyage, we will be monitoring the situation and the alarm will go off when there is an issue. So the second part is putting together an integrated monitoring system. And the third, we analyze all of the stress signals to understand the fatigue life, abrasion, as well as the overall life of the ship. And last but not least is utilizing the digital twin to manage the structural integrity of the ship. So strategy 1 and 2 will be combined into one integrated system, which will be on board. And the third and fourth strategy has to do with maintenance. So it will be installed on ground to manage the situation. In the case of the IC strength map, you can see that there are high and low resolution images that are gathered from the satellite, and the automatic classification would be done on the images to understand the sea ice strength. There is, as you can see, the seasonal map of the icy strength, and next is on the safety route. Once we have this map, there could be multiple routes possible from A to B. And so we will look at the structural aspect and also in terms of the ice load to see whether that ship can actually fare such route. And not only that, it's about optimization to find the optimum route that will help us get to the destination in the shortest period of time. So that's how it's done, if you refer to the slide. So visualization of the characteristics of the sea ice is an input that we would be using, and we will be visualizing that using this program. We will edit the sea route to decide on the optimum route of the ship. Let me now move on to our real-time integrated monitoring system. There are many sensors that are attached to the ship, and especially for the icebreaker, for the areas that break the ice, there are multiple sensors that are attached. Not only Araon, but for the LNG carriers or the tankers and the automobile carrying vessels, all can utilize this integrated monitoring system. So you have to check whether these sensors can be used in cryogenic circumstances, and also it's attached to very narrow areas. So we're looking into wireless capabilities. So for Arawon, you can see that the sensors were attached to gather information and monitor the information. So the signals that come from the bridge can be monitored. When there is a risky situation, the alarm will go off. And we now have a slide that indicates how the fatigue damage can be forecast it, and also how we can engage in simulation to reflect this data in the non-measured portions of the ship. On the ship, well, you can see the ship. We're seeing abrasion take place, so we have to measure that to understand the fatigue damage, and all of this data is being accumulated to check the fatigue life of the ship. I tried to summarize this on one slide. So real time, we gather this data on board, and then we engage in an assessment on the structural response of the BIC. We expand that out to the non-measured areas, and using the digital twin, we can have that all embedded into the system for simulation. So this is the abrasion test that's done, and we're collecting the data. So this is the digital twin structural integrity management system. So it manages all of the sensors. It forecasts the remaining lifespan of the ship. So that's all brought together to understand when maintenance should take place. And also decision making on the risk-based maintenance can be done by using this data. This is the digital twin management system that was developed. This is a 3D system. You can just click onto the tabs and you can see the life remaining for all of these individual parts and components. Starting from last year, we've been conducting this project. It's a 3-year project. The Korean Register is the lead, and there are multiple organizations, including DSME, Inha National University, Inha Technical College, Copri, Seoul National University, and in the sensors, FutureMain. So all of the leading institutions are involved, and we are coordinating all of the efforts. Next year, I think the research will be completed, where we will be able to present to you some refined findings of the research. Thank you very much.
예, 오늘 이 자리가
Yes, thank you. We talked about the climate, ocean, ecology, bio, fish resources, as well as some of the technologies that should be on board for IBRV. So we've had a comprehensive list up of various topics. And thank you very much for the speakers for their insightful presentations. And we can see that the audience has been benefiting greatly from the presentations. It's very difficult to do this, but miraculously, we are right on time. It's right now 11:30. So I would like to thank you all for being with us, and we'll now take a 10-minute break and then resume to invite our speakers and panelists for a panel discussion. So I will see you back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
And now we will start a designated discussion with experts on the 5 presentations. This session will be moderated by Mr. Kim Sung-jun of Copri Climate Research Head. We have Mr. Kim Baek-min from PNU, Yang Eun-jin from Copri, Mr. Kim Do-nam of National Institute of Fisheries Science, Mr. Do Ha-kwon of Copri, and Mr. Ju Hyung-min of Copri from the IBRV team. And now the moderator has the floor. Thank you very much for the introduction. Good day. I am honored to be the moderator for the discussion session of the Korea Arctic Science Research Seminar. I am Kim Sung-jung of Copri. And before we start the discussion, I would like to say that the 5 presentations were all very interesting. And during the presentation, we've had some online questions. So before we proceed with the discussion, let me pose the question first to Professor Myung-in Lee.
So with regard to the sea ice concentration and density, whether those are both same concepts. So I think that it's basically more or less the same sea ice intensity as well as concentration. So with that, let us begin the panel discussion. We have 5 panelists, and they were already introduced by our MC. So let us now begin. We have about 50 minutes for the panel discussion, so we cannot allot a lot of time for our individual participants or panelists. We will be able to give you about 5 minutes per person. So I'd like to first ask Professor Kim Baek-min from Bugyeong National University for your intervention. Yes, thank you. Let me now begin my comments on Professor Lee's presentation. Professor Lee talked about the relationship between the Arctic and the mid-latitudes. So thank you very much for giving us a summary on your research. In 2014, you've also introduced my paper, so thank you very much. When I was engaging in research, there wasn't any papers that looked into the teleconnection between the Arctic and the Korean Peninsula. Along with Dr. Kim Song-jung, what I tried to do was to understand the climatic relationship between the Arctic and Korea in the winter season. But ever since, we've been seeing more research emerging. And Professor Lee also talked about the fact that we're now moving for not only the winter season, but also to the summertime to understand the relationship of events or anomalies of heat waves, as well as forest fires, and how that's interconnected with the changes in the Arctic. Thank you very much for that detailed presentation. So you can see that we do have now a clear relationship based on observations between the Arctic and the mid-latitude weather events. So then, based on this relationship or teleconnection, how can we raise our predictability in our forecast? That was also mentioned in his presentation. And he introduced to us some recent research projects, and that if we do have more sufficient observation data of the Arctic, we will be able to raise the predictability performance of our weather forecast in the mid-latitudes. With regard to the background of Professor Lee's presentation, I would like to say that there was a lot of research on the relevance between the Arctic and mid-latitudes. However, on the other side, many of the conclusions were drawn that there isn't a clear relationship between the two. There were a lot of papers that were published as such. But if you look at these two conflicting papers, for those that believe that there is a relationship between the two, would base off their paper on the statistical analysis on past observational data. For those that believe that there's an uncertain relationship, would be focused on the computer numerical models. So still, there is some controversy between these two groups, and my paper was also at the center of such discourse and dialogue. But as I was listening to Professor Lee's presentation, there was one point that came to my mind that was deemed important. If you look at the recent research, compared to the mid-latitudes, you can see that the Arctic region, that's about just a tenth of the mid-latitudes. If we do have more sufficient data on Arctic observations, and because we have better satellite technology, we will be able to get more data to monitor the Arctic. And with better monitoring, you've mentioned that the predictability of the models will be improved. So I believe that if we can enhance the modeling based on further input from Arctic observation data, I think that we may be able to find a middle ground between these two conflicting views in the academia. So I was able to find some key implications from his presentation. Thank you very much for that. But I think that there are some areas that may require some more improvement, where, yes, we do understand that the Arctic is important. So then where should be our focus? If we think about the climate change in Korea and to resolve the issues at hand in Korea, particularly which area in the Arctic should we focus on? I would like to maybe give some more food for thought on that. So Director Seo Won-sang mentioned that through the next generation IBRV, we will able to go into and trailblaze into new fronts. So the next generation IBRV will have better accessibility to the Arctic Circle. And in 2014 and now, there's a great difference in terms of the you can see that closer to originally it was in Norway, but it's now moving towards central Siberia, where we're seeing these interactions between the atmosphere and the ocean. So if we want to make full use of the next generation IBRV and to understand the climatic relationship of the Arctic and East Asia, and to make sure to understand and forecast these blockings based on the models. I think that we need to maybe shift towards the East Siberian Sea and focus our modeling on that, which will help us make better use of the next generation IBRV, and also have better capabilities of the researchers on climate, because this area seems to be more relevant for the Korean Peninsula. So I think that this will help us deliver more refined results for our region. And Professor Lee, you talked about the importance and emphasized the importance of Arctic observation. But at the end of the day, if we want to raise the predictability of the modeling, the various calculations and formula in the model. So for the climate scholars, we call this the physical calculation process. So these formulas are all coded into the computer model, but you can see that the clouds of the Arctic and the surface ice, you need these inputs into this physical process. So when we do engage in research to better the input, I think that we can raise the predictability. And one final point. Climate change is impacting our everyday life, and we call this not climate change, but now climate crisis. And centered on the government, carbon neutrality is the key word right now, so many people are interested in this topic. However, there is one point that we need to remember. In order to achieve carbon neutrality in 2050, I don't know whether it be 1.5, 2 degrees, or 3 degrees, but we need to have accurate forecasting. In other words, we need accurate scientific data to achieve carbon neutrality. So we need to once again review how accurate we are in our forecast. And as a climate scholar, what I can say is that the uncertainty of these climate models, and we need to find a way to raise the predictability in order for us to achieve true carbon neutrality. And once again, that's why we need to invest in the Arctic, and the next generation IBRV is definitely a new opportunity for us. Thank you.
김 교수님 토론.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Kim, for that comment. You've mentioned about the importance of the Arctic observations, and also the fact that we need to raise the predictability of the models based on this data, and also how we can utilize the next generation IBRV in an efficient fashion to better our predictability in weather forecasts on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you for your comments.
Next, Ms. Yang Eun-jin from Copri. Hello, I am Yang Eun-jin from Copri. Since 2010, I have been looking into the Arctic Ocean, and the building of the IBRV was gleeful news for me. Listening to 5 presentations, I think that the IBRV will be very much in use. And Professor Kim Seung-gyu, you mentioned the environmental pollutants and ecosystem, and my comment is on your presentation. At the end of your presentation, you mentioned that we know very little about the Arctic pollution, and it came right to my heart. ARAON actually conducted so much research in the Arctic. However, as you know, ARAON had limited sea time and ice breaking capability, which meant that there was so much lacking that we needed to tackle all these Arctic issues, and that is why we are building a new IBRV. As climate change continues, the Arctic Ocean is actually opening up in terms of ocean and air. Pollutants are reaching the Arctic Ocean, and such inflow of pollutants are impacting the species inhabiting the Arctic and the human life that feed off of those species. So the trajectory of the pollutants and how the type of pollutants must be identified as a priority. And in the end, the next generation IBRV, once built in the Arctic CAO, will reach into areas that could not be reached by ARAON, but starting with the areas that ARAON has reached, to look at the marine pollutants, to collect information, and in real time monitor through by building an observation network. In this way, I think we will be able to access pollutants in the Arctic in a more easy manner. And another point, many people ask me, what if the ice-breaking vessel just break up all the ice in the Arctic? Wouldn't that impact the environment? Well, I don't know what to say to that, really. I am speechless. But when we approach pollutants in the Arctic Ocean, I believe that IBRV will be spending more than 150 days in the Arctic Ocean. And that way, from the IBRV, there will be many different pollutants coming out of the IBRV, which should not be neglected. And once the new vessel is built, environmental pollutants in relation must be researched together. And secondly, in the CAO Fisheries, Dr. Da has already presented that Araon didn't have any system to fish, but despite that, CAO Fisheries Agreement has been signed, and therefore we must protect the fisheries in the Arctic, and in a very primordial manner. We had to catch one fish one by one, and we had to filter the seawater for eDNA, and we used different assimilated data to collect the relevant data. But thankfully, in 6 times years, when the next IBRV is built, the vessel will have many different latest equipment that are attached to the vessel to analyze fish data. And we will be using this equipment to conduct fisheries research in the CAO. After the CALFA agreement has been signed, we will both tackle the research and also look at the fish as well. And this will be very good and advantageous for us to get a fishing quota allocated later on in the CAO. And Araon in its own way and the next IBRV in its own way will be used to conduct research in the CAO. Although there is very little fish in the CAO at the moment, we will continue and we will need to continue to accumulate relevant data. And lastly, once the IBRV is built, I think one of the key missions that needs to be carried out is a one-stop Arctic Sea research project. Yes, atmosphere, ocean are very important pollutants travel to the Arctic through the air and water from the subpolar region to the polar region. And as Professor Kim mentioned, microplastics flow into the Arctic through the air, but are built in the sea ice, in the water, and accumulated and deposited. So Arctic research should go beyond just ocean research. We must observe from the space, atmosphere, sea, ice, sea itself, and the subsea area. And all this needs to be tackled in a one-stop project. And in that way, I think we can contribute and find clues to resolving all the Arctic issues that remain unresolved. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your comments about the marine pollutants, their trajectory identification. The next generation IBRV, once launched, could be releasing its environmental pollutants. So we need to take an interest in that. And also, Araon has researched the fishery resources in a very primitive manner, but with the IBRV, we'll have latest equipment for this, and an integrated one-stop project is needed.
Next, I would like to invite Dr. Kim Doo-nam of National Institute of Fisheries Science. Hello, everyone. Thank you, and it's a great pleasure to join our panelists in the discussion. I would like to talk about Dr. Na Hyung-sur's Korea Science strategy presentation on Korea Science strategy for the conservation and management of fish in the Central Arctic Ocean. It was very interesting, and thank you so much for that in-depth research. With regard to cow in the high seas, until 2017, there was the fish stock expert meeting the fifth meeting took place in 2017, and there was a lot of reference that was used to engage in mapping as well as monitoring. And in 2020, through the ad hoc coordinating group, SAS as well as Mosaic research projects were underway. And as you've mentioned, the Arahon did not take part in the Mosaic program, and that was quite a pity in my view. But of course, I'm sure that Dr. Na, you were involved, which is of course fortunate, and I believe that it was a great opportunity for you to collect information. As I was listening to your presentation, at Copri, it's for the 5 years and 9 months. There was a K-aware program and plans were set forth. And I can see that you have a well detailed out plan for that K-aware research program, and I hope that we can also find a way to contribute to that research project or program. And we believe that the high seas and the fishing resources, can we actually connect the two? Is the question that comes to my mind. Every time I take part in scientific seminars and I listen to presentations, and also after I listen to your presentation, this is a thought that remains, because we are identifying biodiversity and we're trying to understand the distribution of the species. But I think that this is a slightly different angle from utilizing the fish resources. For instance, we talked about the IBRV, where the midwater trawl will be installed onto the next generation icebreaker. But in order to engage in a certain type of targeted fishing, what needs to be done is to understand and analyze the biological characteristics of the species and find the optimal fishing method to catch such fish. So you need a multidimensional analysis and approach, and then you make that lead up to a certain fishing method. So I think that it's not just about sampling out from a random distribution. So in that aspect, I think that if that was the target, then that would be fine. But if you want to connect this with fisheries and the fishing method, I think that there may be a gap between the two. And in the CAO, there are also fishing methods that are prohibited from damaging the bottom seabed. So I know that there were benthic fish stocks that do live in the seas. And it's very difficult to identify the distribution of such fish stock. And based on what you've mentioned, Dr. Na, I believe that there may be two recommendations or suggestions that I can pose as a member of the NIFS. So first, in CAO, we have Canada and Greenland and other coastal states. And that I think that joint research with these countries are pivotal, because these fish resources are highly migratory and straddling stocks. And you can see that they are broadening their horizon with the opening up of CAO. So I think that we need joint research with the countries, because the fish stock, of course, as you know, they do not set their boundaries on the boundaries of or the EEZ. So in addition to the existing research reference, and if we do engage in research voice of the next generation IBRVs, I think that it's important to have other external researchers and foreign researchers on board to engage in joint research. In the case of a scientific research, based on CALFA, it indicates that within 2 years you need to establish a joint research program to see whether the fish resources can be catched in a sustainable fashion, and that we need to assess the impact on the fish stock. But if you look at the Antarctic and in other high seas, if you see the case of the RFMOs, it's true that the Arctic is probably the very last standing contentious waters of high seas. So based on the other research programs, I think that we need to take preventative measures. And if that is the case, I think that not in 2 years, but maybe in 10 years, we may not be able to engage in any research on the sustainable fishing methodology. So that's why I want to say that we do need joint research with other coastal states in the Arctic Circle. And especially Copri and Korea have these key experts like Dr. Na, and you are also a expert in sounds, and you have various techniques and facilities and equipment. And AUBRV, you've mentioned about the various undersea types of facilities and equipment. So with such expertise and experts like you, I think that even without utilizing fish gear, we may be able to understand the distribution of biodiversity underwater. For fishing, what we want to do is also introduce an electronic monitoring system. So in order to engage in such monitoring projects, you need image information and also information on the fish stock. But the coastal states within the EEZ do have such information, and I think that if deep learning can be possible, we can do that, and if we do need machine learning, that can also be utilized. So within this monitoring system, I think that it would be best to identify the species, measure the size, and for that to be possible, we need information from the coastal states, and we can utilize this information to maybe forecast and predict the weight. And I think that even without certain equipments, this can be possible. So I would like to mention that this could be another possibility for further joint effort. And the second point I would like to make, many did mention that site observations are more accurate than satellite observations, and that there may be a big numerical gap between the two. So you've mentioned about the importance of utilizing buoys for site observation. So continuous monitoring, I would like to say, is of course important. In the case of microplastics, with a greater concentration of the microplastics, you can see that there are specific species in the ecosystem that are greatly impacted, first and foremost. But if we do have Araon and IBRV, we will be able to draw a better picture. But I want to say that there are the biological, chemical, and physical factors that need to be continuously monitored even before we have the next generation IBRV. And we mentioned this with Dr. Na during the break, but the oceanic survey is, of course, always done. It doesn't go as planned, and when it reaches about 60% of our targeted goal, we say that we have actually achieved our goal. So there are so many factors in the observation or survey on board that will be impacted by so many external factors. So in the case of this K-Aware project, I'm pretty sure that there may be many challenges along the way, but despite the fact, I do want to mention that sustained monitoring is key. And in your presentation, I did make note of a couple of points. Dr. Na, you've indicated various methods about the net for the larval fish, for instance. And in the little waters, we also had non-invasive fish gear to collect these benthic fish. For instance, you can see that in the case of the octopus and for the non-vertebrates in the benthic areas or layers of the sea, I think that there could be other methods that can be utilized to collect such fish. So before we do have the next generation IBRV, I think that there are some better ways that we can utilize going forward. And then also about getting proactive information on the biological resources. I want to mention that this is really important. If you look at the Arctic waters, is probably the only high seas that does not have an RFMO. So what we're trying to do is acquire proactively information on the Arctic. And when we do have an RFMO in place, what could happen is we can actually contribute in the efforts and endeavors, and we will be able to get more incentives in the process. So in our scientific research, I want to mention that a proactive acquisition of information in this region is something that I really would like to support. Thank you very much.
의견 감사드립니다. 중앙국학회
Thank you very much for your views. You've mentioned that right now, this current research status is on identifying the distribution of species, but to make that link with fisheries, you've mentioned that is a different story. And with climate change and with the decline of Arctic sea ice, you've mentioned that joint research with the coastal states would be key. And of course, it would be great if we could engage in scientific observations, but AUVs can be utilized, and we can also verify these other unmanned and satellite observations. But you've also mentioned that we can actually acquire images to better the understanding in our observations.
Thanks, Mr. Do. Yes, I am from Copri. My name is Do Ha-kwon. Copri had two keywords in tackling biological research. First, good adaptive strategy, and secondly, polar sourced useful resource development. And Professor Yoon, from an brought an outside perspective to pursue commercialization research, and you presented your results of research done so far. Two things. Number one, the evolution of polar resources were identified, and secondly, good protein from polar animals were looked at to look at how these animals adapt to the cold conditions. And based on the commercialization research results, certain genomes from polar animals and fish were extracted to look at the mechanism of control in cold conditions, and this can lead to developing actual cure for sarcopenia. And thankfully, Professor Yoon said that through the substances found in polar organisms, we can lay the foundation for further development of medicine. There are combining proteins that combine with mTOR that can help overcome sarcopenia. And Arctic krill, also, we can extract 70% of elements to test and validate potential to overcome sarcopenia. So that was the gist of the presentation. And for both issues, presenters have made their points. And if you look at these issues, the first issue is that global warming, which is leading to declining of sea ice and increased flow of fresh water, anthropogenic activities that boost pollutants, or what kind of impact this will have on species. Well, we are conducting monitoring, but not much research. As sea ice melts and CAO becomes more opened up, what happens to the organisms that live there? What happens to the species, for example? And polar organisms adapt to temperature. They are very sensitive to temperature, and they are at a high risk of being lost through extinction. And Professor Da mentioned using fish resources to maximize research is needed. And lastly, useful bioresources must be maximized for use. Climate change, and what we can learn from IBRV is that climate change impacts the abundance of the species. they can be driven into extinction. And number two, through the IBRV research, we can engage more institutes, not only Copri, to look at more and extract more useful resources from the Arctic. So what I would like to recommend based on the presentations is that for polar resources, we need a more comprehensive management system that is yet to be built. In step with changes, I think that we need to build a comprehensive and integrated management system so that polar resources can be efficiently managed, and we need to include cultivation systems and conservation systems. I know that there are useful possible potential materials, but we cannot conduct research all at once. So we need to maintain a resource management system so that we can secure bioresources. And as Professor Yoon mentioned, when we need help from external experts, we can share data with them through a system. And through this system, we can build a basis for international cooperation. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you for your comments. As global warming happens in the Arctic, sea ice is melting and pollutants keep flowing into the Arctic. So the impact to the polar and mid-latitude areas is huge, but the impact on the biological impact has not been fully researched. And with the global warming in the Arctic Ocean, this can lead to a reduction in abundance, in fact. So with a comprehensive observation system on polar resources, we can share data. And that was the gist of your comment.
죄송합니다. 주영민 단장님 부탁드립니다.
Next, Dr. Chu Hyung-min of Copri. Hello, everyone. I'm Chu Hyung-min, in charge of the IBRV team at Copri. Our speakers are all on the demand side of IBRV, and I think that I'm the only person that's on the supply side of the IBRV. This August, I joined the IBRV team, and you can see that Mr. Seo was the very first original team of the IBRV, which we passed the pre-feasibility study. And us as the second team is to build a robust ship based on the bidding process to select the ship builder of our next generation IBRV. And I want to say that we do have the strong responsibility to build a robust ship that will enable research voice in 2027. As was already mentioned, we had the 7 challenges that we wanted to address and what we wanted to present at the pre-feasibility study. And we will make sure to build that ship based on your input. But there are a couple of points I would like to mention. Professor Kim talked about marine pollution. Of course, research on pollution is important, but what's more important is to make sure that it does not pollute the Arctic Circle. So we are trying to focus on building eco-ships or green ships. As you know, we do have 2 dual fuel, including LNG, to reduce any impact on the air, so reduce air pollution. And we've seen strengthened regulations on exhaust gas from the ship, but what we want to do is to make our internal standard more stricter. So SCR are some of the equipment that we will have on board to reduce NOx and to make the ship greener than any other ship. And Professor Lee and Professor Na and Kim talked about some of the research that can be done in the high seas. So to cater to these needs, we will make sure to enhance our ice breaking as well as structural integrity capabilities. And Dr. Na talked about the importance of joint research. In the case of the Araon, it's being operated in both the Arctic and Antarctic. So in the Arctic, you can research for 35 to 40 days approximately. But if we do have the next generation IBRV, this ship, if it goes according to plan, about 150 days can be provided as the research period by using this IBRV. So I think that a lot of the research demands can be satisfied in the process. And then with regard to ship safety by Mr. Song, so we have CRISO as our joint lead to find a way to enhance the safety features of the IBRV. As you know, the next generation IBRV will be much more capable than the other one in terms of size as well as other capabilities, and we will have various equipment on board. So as a researcher, I know that you would want the optimal environment to engage in your research, so we will make sure to have that in mind starting from the design. Adam was our very first IBRV, so it was the first for everything, for all of us, so there were a lot of challenges, but based on that, we've learned a lot of lessons, and for about 10 or so years through the voyaging in the Arctic and Antarctic, we were able to accumulate knowledge and know-how and feedback from the researchers on what the next generation IBRV should look like. Next year, when lead agency is selected, we will be hosting many public hearings, and I would like to ask for your feedback and your insights so that we can build a better IBRV. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your comments. So, as the supplier of the IBRV, you mentioned that there could be certain pollution from IBRV, the new next generation IBRV, and you've mentioned that you're going to make sure that it's an eco ship or a green ship. And with with a lengthened voyage period, you've mentioned that a lot of the research needs will be satisfied in the process. And there are waters that the next generation IBRV will be able to travel, and you've mentioned about enhancing the robustness and the integrity of the IBRV to make that possible. And he also talked about the importance of seeking feedback, and that the organization will be hosting public hearings to build a better ship. I would like to extend my gratitude to the meaningful interventions of all of our panelists. I think that we have about 10 minutes remaining. So in addition to our designated discussants, I would like to ask our speakers as well as those here on site if there are any comments that you may have on this topic. So with regard to the presentations, as well as any comments on ways to facilitate Arctic research, is there anybody that would like to chip in? Yes, Director Sohn-sang, would you like to go first?
Yes. When I heard the keynote speech, I heard it from a research planner. And as an international law expert, I would like to present on the CAUFA. As I planned this project and as I heard of the demand for fisheries research, I believe that the direction for scientific research must include conservation of fisheries resources in cow. But research in fisheries in cow doesn't mean development or industrial development. It also includes how the fish species are distributed in this area and how we can better conserve them is the whole purpose of CAUFA. And through 10 years of scientific research, we found that this can be sustainably and economically if we conclude that economically these fishery resources can be used in a sustainable manner, then we will start allocating the quota. Same for KO. For this project, conservation of fisheries resources is the main purpose, and once we are sure that fishery resources can be safely conserved, then we can start looking into possible fisheries. So I think that we are in the same line. Thank you very much for that. Regarding fishery resources, yes, whether we are going to use it or conserve the resources, I think that there is a debate. The Arctic region itself, well, what happens in the mid-latitude area impacts negatively to the Arctic, and as the Arctic melts, the shipping route is shortened. And I don't think this necessarily leads to an increased pollution, but it can also reduce transaction distance and time. save energy as we ship the same volume of cargo. So I don't think that only we can see this only negatively, because CO2, when emitted immediately, mixes up with the atmosphere. Of course, aerosol is a different story, but anyhow, that is one point I wanted to raise. And anyone else? Comments, questions, or anything? In the interest of time, maybe Mr. Kim?
저는 그냥 북극에서의 환경 오염
If we just focus on the pollution of the Arctic,
Yes, I collaborated with Copri in not only Arctic but Antarctic. I conducted microplastic research. One of the key findings for Antarctica was using a research station, but the pollutants coming out of the research station itself, the discharge water, in fact, could be an important source of pollution in Antarctica, as we are learning. And so now we have various agreements in place to protect the Antarctic region, but any compulsory actions are not yet in place yet. And we are still in the process of setting the criteria for what can be done in Antarctica. But once these issues become more serious and raised, then the regulation will be strengthened. So the research stations will have to have facilities or measures in place to prevent pollution. So in that sense, for polar research, and for the IBRV, I believe that similar applications will be applied. So as Mr. Chu has mentioned, not only using low sulfur fuel or limiting air pollutant emissions, which is ongoing, but as we compile these efforts, we can also look at the heavy water discharge, the control of the discharge regulation, and the painting material on the ships, and so forth. All these specific regulations are being discussed among scholars. So going forward, as vessels are more in use, then those regulations may come to force. So we must think of them in advance. When you are building the vessel, I think that you need to give these sides a consideration. Maybe not at the very initial stage, but later when these issues arise, you need to have some kind of a buffer and strategy to respond accordingly. Thank you very much. As we operate the station, and I was a winter team leader myself, but discharge water is always a cause of concern. With more and more stations built, then of course we do think that the pollution from the stations could be a possibility, so we need to reinforce regulations. And as Mr. Chu has mentioned, in those terms, IBRV must restrain and minimize pollutants as much as possible as research is pursued. So anybody else?
최영주 실장
And maybe Mr. Choi, if any questions online? None. All right, then anyone from the floor?
시장철 부장입니다.
빨리 밥 먹기 위해서
it's just me between lunch, so I want to mention.
30년이나 50년을 내다보고
I want to say that as the pole of the Earth, I think that we may have to be more, let's say, provocative in the words that we may use. I think there is a lot of research that we want to do in the future, but I think that we need a 10-year or 20-year roadmap, because if we do not have that long-term plan, it would just be about trying to find a budgeting in a short span of time. So I think that it's important to make sure that we have a long-term perspective going forward.
예, 우리 좋은 말씀 해주셨고요.
Thank you for the wonderful comment, and of course, This may be a sensitive topic, but the IBRV will not be just for Copri, but for all academic and industrial use for all of us, I believe. So I think that was the point of the comment. And since we have run out of time and it's lunchtime, we had been running a very tight program, and I apologize. So with this, I would like to conclude the Korea Arctic Science Research Seminar. Thank you very much. Thank you. The moderator has done wonderfully keeping in time, and we are right on time. Thank you very much. Today's seminar was so very sophisticated in terms of presentation and discussion, second to none. Thank you very much for the high quality content. And with that, I would like to declare that the Korea Arctic Science Research Seminar has come to an end. I would like to thank all participants joining us online and offline for joining us. And why don't we conclude the seminar with a big round of applause. Thank you very much.